Chapter 3, When Shit Hits the Fan, continued. Then I tapped the kid on the shoulder, and when he turned, he had no face. Just blank, nothing, nada. I backed away slowly like I was in one of the Jason movies. Suddenly, some text rushed in, and the childlike thing seemed angry, and he threw the crayon at the wall. He started beating the floor with his fists. The tile turned red as he beat harder and harder. Blood pooled, and the techs tried their best to restrain him. I looked down at my hands at the scars where there were broken bones. I remembered this. My father sent me here when I misbehaved. I couldn't remember what I had done wrong, but somebody got hurt bad. Real bad. That's when he stepped in from behind a one-way observation mirror. A very sterile-looking man wearing a human face. Black sunglasses, a black-brimmed hat, and a black suit. He smiled at me, but it wasn't human. I didn't know what it was. "Funny," he said in this pale, dead tone. "Your father was one of the original Space Rangers, and here you are, the last, Ed Eisenhower." "How do you know my name?" I asked curtly. "What are you?" The thing inched ever so closer. It seemed almost predatory and innately vile. It smiled that weird smile again. "We've been ogling you, Mr. Eisenhower," he replied. "Give me the formula." I smiled. "What formula?" I said, lying. I knew now. "The Archipelago Formula," replied the creature as he dove for me. I felt a hand searing my skin. It burned hot like 1,000 suns. That's when I noticed that the child had written on the paper before he was dragged out. It was written in blood. "The Archipelago Formula," I whispered. I felt the symbols as they went through the air and down my throat. Then the ogler began to incinerate. I felt everything dissolve, and I felt the ground shake. Then there was a loud boom. "The generator!" The shield was down. The oglers were rushing in. I sputtered up vomit as I sat up. I looked across the way. It was Katie. But what was she doing out of Anchorage? She should be home finishing high school. "I dropped out," she replied casually. She always knew what I was thinking. "Okay, we've got to go, baby cakes. This place is going to be swarming with oglers pretty soon." I smiled even wider and coughed up some blood. "Mama Ritz, you always were a feisty one." "Don't you know it, baby? Now don't get your space panties in a bunch." She tapped my foot. I jumped down from the bed. That's when I coughed up a huge chunk of enchanted metal that seemed way too big for any known human orifice. My throat literally had to widen to get it out. There were symbols written on it in an alien language. "Is that it?" asked Candlian. I felt the weight of the object in my hand as I threw up again, dry heaving. "I don't think my stomach can take any more," I said. "Come on," replied Doc, who was already at the ship's doorway. "You got a god ship?" I asked. "How did you get a god ship?" "Long story," replied Katie, as we ran for the tractor beam that pulled us in. As we lifted into the air, I felt the air vibrate as we took on fire. A god ship was fierce, but oglers were fiercer, and they had been searching for the Archipelago Formula for millennia. "Where did you find the Archipelago Formula? And why was part of it stuck in its brain?" asked Candlian. Roscoe frowned at the oncoming onslaught of missile fire. "Well, long story short, we found it in a prairie on Notune, inside of an abandoned well. Some minor M's thought it was a toy, and they were playing with it a long, long time ago, and they tossed it in there to the dismay of their shaman, who was going to use it for minor purposes." healing properties and all that. So anyways, they just decide to leave it, and the Oglers have been searching for it ever since. We met Ed in a star bar, and he was raving mad because he had heard the story, which had been written on an ancient text out in the Galloway galaxy, which I don't know why he would want to be out there. And so he hires our services, and we're like, it's Eisenhower, he can hang with us. So we make him an official space ranger, which hasn't happened in, 30 years, replied Doc. Yep, so he's the first space ranger in 30 years after Pantheon here. And so we get to this well, but the whole place is crawling with oglers, who are looking for the formula, which turns out is more of a gem with a kind of formula written on it. And so it has this curse that was put on it by the shaman for ritual purposes. Ed touches it. He almost dies. Doc didn't know how to tell the guy, plus we kept diving into his subconscious to help him survive the curse. He was half loony and he was going to die anyways from the ogler who had jumped into his brain and ogled the crap out of him. The warning was written in the subtext, which was the only thing translatable on the damn thing, and this ogler sure as hell didn't make things easy. Am I getting ahead of myself? Anyways, that's when we get him back to the ship, and the makeshift lab Doc set up, and Daisy goes to get the first antidote, but turns out Pantheon here has to dive into his subconscious mind again. We're all tired as heck and beaten up from battling defense mechanisms, and don't get me started with Tafters. That Maine Coon is a beast. So we jump down in there, and we can all only dive around one more time. So that's when we decide to rejoin the formula, because the ogler that's stuck in his id is sucking in the stone. It gets broken off from the hole, and so we have to kill this thing before it kills Ed. Only problem is that Ed's been down there so long, he can't remember that he's a space ranger. He can't even remember he's an M. So that's how we got here. Wow, said Ed. I remember now, I'm a space ranger. See what I mean? Replied Roscoe. Totally oblivious. Can you get us out of here? Asked Katie to the captain as he pulled up on a celestial moon. Lightspeed coming up, he replied. The ogler zoomed in and out of space, targeting the ship's mainframe. Then everything went black and the godship grew into hushed whispers from the crew. Then they heard footsteps. Thousands and thousands of footsteps. They've boarded, replied Pantheon.